Welcome to the Viewpoint. I am Mamadou Mbodj. At last year's UK Africa Summit, the British Prime Minister said that Britain had all it took for it to become Africa's obvious partner of choice for doing business post-Brexit. And other officials have said other things as well. One of them said Britain's relations with Africa will be turbocharged with trade, business, investment deals being struck left, right, and center. However, with the current COVID-19 pandemic, and nobody really knows what's going to be the final cost of that, and the changes happening in Africa, what's happening in Britain, its domestic politics, geopolitically, in many ways, we have no idea where we're heading. So what chances of fulfilling that fantastic idea? Here today, we've come to the residence of the British High Commissioner, His Excellency David Belgrove.
Good to have you here.
Absolutely, who would help us explore some of the themes, some of the questions that arise out of this situation. I must say, this is the second time we're coming here, the Viewpoint. We did one with your predecessor last year, Sharon.
Well, I hope you can feel at home.
Absolutely, and she was extremely hospitable and very nice and stuff.
Very good to have you here.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So this is it. Brexit has happened,
Yes.
So everybody's watching. So I suppose the first question will be, how is it shaping up?
Well, as you know, I think we saw the final stages of Brexit at the end of last year when we reached our agreement moving forward in our relationship with the European Union. As you mentioned in your preliminary comments, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so that has complicated matters, and I think that's obvious to everybody. But in terms of how it's shaping up, I mean, we haven't actually lost momentum. I mean, one of the things that the UK government has just completed is an integrated review of our foreign policy, our defence policy and our development policy. And so out of that, we are very much moving forward. So we really haven't lost a lot of momentum, and it's been hard work over the last year. We've merged the Department for International Development and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office into what is now a new department, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And we have refreshed our strategy on Africa, which I think you alluded to earlier, and we've looked at it again in the light of that integrated review. So in terms of how it's affected our work in Africa, there hasn't been a lot of loss of momentum in terms of our policy development on what we plan to do in Africa. Obviously, it's been complicated by the pandemic, but we're using the new technologies available to us to continue that work, and I think that's where we are now. And I think the encouraging thing is, as you said, we don't know quite where we're going to end up. But what we do have now is a way out of the pandemic. We have the tools out of the pandemic, particularly in terms of vaccines. There are new treatments, but the challenge now is to using all those tools and implementing them. And we've still got some way to go on that, but we are starting to move forward.
Absolutely. You've mentioned the integrated review. And it was quite interesting. I was going through it the other day. So where does Africa come in?
So in terms of the integrated review, we've got certain key priority areas on Africa, and they are building resilient economies. And I think that's incredibly important. I don't think there's any amount of aid money that is necessarily on its own going to lift people out of poverty and move people forward. And so building those economies and the private sector, all important. The other big priority for us is open societies, and that's enhancing democracy, press freedom, human rights, all of those things. And in the Gambia, that's particularly a priority, is actually consolidating the democratic gains that have been made recently. Safety and security. None of those things happen unless you've got a secure and safe environment. So that's another priority area for us. Human development, and particularly actually lifting those in what they call the bottom billion out of extreme poverty, and that's a priority area. But also, and particularly for us this year, climate change and green economies, and a cleaner, greener economies, particularly with a view to the fact that we're hosting the COP26 talks at the end of the year in Scotland. So we have quite a broad portfolio, but this is what has come out of the integrated review and a relook at our strategy on Africa.
That's exactly it. So, and you also mentioned the merger between DFID and the Foreign Office, yes, creating another office. So this is the thing, given that what you've catalogued, what you really need to do, but again with this merger, some critics do say that the focus, the concentration that DFID had, so now it will be weakened. So it seems as if your priorities, your developmental strategic priorities might perhaps override really our economic needs.
I mean, it's a very interesting question, and I think it is certainly one worth asking. I'm old enough to remember when I first joined the Foreign Office, our development wing, which was then called the Overseas Development Administration, was part of the Foreign Commonwealth Office. And then in 1997, under the Blair government, they separated away. And then I think there was actually a strong argument to have two different departments, because DFID in those days was very much focused on poverty reduction, and there was an argument, I think, to separate that from the political sphere. I think moving forward, quite a few decades, I think that has changed. I think our attitude to foreign policy to some extent has changed. And I think now it makes sense. I think the development, the aid sector is somewhat more sophisticated in the way we do that. And I think it makes sense now to actually align our foreign policy priorities with our development priorities, because I think the two should be aligned. And so it's a more sophisticated approach. I think by merging the two departments, we can be more efficient. But our political aims should be the same as our development aims, and they should not be separate. And so it is a complex task, putting the two. I mean, and none of my colleagues, either in DFID or in the FCO, or what was DFID or the FCO, would say this has been easy. And we're still going through the process. But I think it does mean that we can actually take advantage of efficiencies, but very focus our aims that should, our political aims should align with our development aims. They should be focused on continuing poverty reduction, but also those other areas, such as human rights, such as the areas I've just mentioned.
Yes, but this is really the key, the link that your political strategic needs will really trump all other considerations in many ways. That has been the charge anyway.
I mean, I think that could be a charge, but I don't think it is the right one. I think our political aims should be the same as our development aims, our strategic aims. And I think, part of the integrated review was focused very much on the fact that the UK should be a force for good. And so, our political aims, are now about safety and security. And development can't take place unless there is a safe and secure environment.
That's it. So that you prioritize that. Granted, given recently the fight against terrorism and all the rest of it. So this is one of it. So you have identified certain areas which you've prioritized and would put in some money. But again, they may not necessarily be the most pressing for others, or that it is important, certainly, but there are other stuff that should be done, really, so that the overall purpose of lifting Africa out of where it is would happen, but it's not happening.
I think I mean, obviously, it's an argument that could go on for quite some time. True. But if you take one example, for example, stemming illegal migration. Now, obviously, you know, the UK upstream interests are to stem illegal migration, you know, because of the burden it puts on, you know, the economies and things like that. But it is also in the interests of countries and the people themselves that they don't get sucked into these illegal migration routes, which are dangerous, which people become exploited. And so reducing poverty in those countries where these people come from and giving them opportunities in those countries and building their economies will actually end up in actually reducing that and reducing that threat to the UK. And I think similar arguments can be in terms of terrorism. If you've got more open societies, good governance, democracy, then the drivers behind terrorism and illegal migration are also reduced. And so the two do link. And I think this is very much behind the merger, in that actually understanding that our interests are served by helping those countries as well. And so the two are not mutually exclusive. They should be complementary.
Granted, but how do you square that with the fact that you've reduced your ODA from 0.7% to what now, 0.4%?
No, 0.5.
0.5, but you've taken billions away from your aid budget.
Yeah, look, that was a very difficult decision. And the reason for that is nothing to do with leaving the European Union.
Condemned by many people. I mean, charities, UK charities, Bill Gates, been condemned across the board.
You know, there's a very good reason for why that reduction has taken place, and that is purely because of the pandemic. The UK has suffered the largest economic contraction that we've had for 300 years. And so that inevitably has impacted on on public sector finances across the board. And so, yes, we recognise that this has been painful, and we've been working with our partners to try and minimise the impact and actually continue to focus where we are putting those projects. But just to emphasise, we are still spending this year £10 billion on aid. We are still the third largest contributor to aid out of the G7 in terms of percentage of our GDP.
But all of that will take a nosedive.
No, the government have been keen to emphasise that as soon as the fiscal situation allows, we'll get back up to 0.7%. But I think everybody
we don't know when.
Sorry?
We do not know when, and some people do say that we don't even know the criteria of what it would mean for the situation to return to normal.
I mean, the government haven't set the criteria, but you know, the Treasury, the Foreign Office, the Prime Minister himself are committed that we will get back to that 0.7%. It's impossible to predict when. But you know, the signs are good. It looks like our economy is actually bouncing back quicker than we thought it would, and if that is sustained, then let's hope that we will be able to get back to that very quickly. But as I say, we are continuing to spend, you know, very large amounts of aid money. I think we're spending £900 million just on health alone this year. You know, we'll be spending £400 million on girls' education. There is a lot of stuff that's going on, another $1 billion on climate change. So, you know, there's a lot of good work still going on. We recognise that this has been difficult, but we are trying our best to minimise the pain.
Absolutely, but again, we've heard Polio UK, you've taken a lot from there, UNICEF, malaria research, so even bilateral specific agreements, 60% down, so that would obviously affect Gambia. I take it, we'll go into that later. So how would you respond to this argument, though, that the reason why you scrapped DFID, reduced your ODA contribution to 0.5 was really that falls in line with the Brexit cause. a lot of people really do not like your spending money, particularly on Africa. I mean, we once heard, and maybe this is not the right place to bring it out, but it's important to do so, when your Prime Minister said people of the Commonwealth were what, nincompoops flying flags. So there is this body of opinion, there's this voice, huge voice, we heard it during Brexit, that doesn't really like you spending on Africa. After all, you have poor people in Britain, why not spend on them?
I don't think that's a fair comment, actually. I mean, we will be spending half of all our development money, half our aid will be spent on Africa. It is a big focus for us. I think what our new arrangements will be post-Brexit gives us more flexibility to, on trade policy. It gives us flexibility to align our trade policy to our development policies. And the reduction in aid has nothing to do with Brexit, has nothing to do with any of that. It is absolutely just because of our economic contraction. And I think everybody has to recognize, the cost of this pandemic. And this is why we were one of the founders of the COVAX facility, which is making vaccines available to everybody throughout the world, but particularly Africa. Countries in Africa are going to be benefiting from that. We were one of the founders of that facility. We are one of the largest contributors to that facility, and our contribution will pay for something like, help pay for something like 1.3 billion vaccine doses. And so, there's no, you can't connect the two. The reduction in aid is purely because of the economic impact of this pandemic.
So it's got nothing to do with that Brexiteers.
I mean, those voices were a small minority of voices. I mean, and I think the wider argument about Brexit was, I think, more about self-determination within the UK rather than some of the more jingoistic voices that were heard, which I think were in the minority. I mean, unfortunately, they tended to grab the headlines, but I think they were in the minority. And certainly the government is very clear that their focus on Africa continues, and that we do want to get back to the aid spending that we had previously. And bearing in mind that we were one of the few countries that actually had committed to spending that 0.7%. We were still a long way ahead of other countries equally as wealthy as us, who weren't actually spending as much.
Absolutely, but and even though as well there are other countries that are also suffering the ravages of COVID-19, but they're still spending
what they've been done.
They were spending
Scandinavian less. Well, Scandinavians maybe have not been affected as badly as we have, but there's other countries which actually were already spending less. So, we've actually only reduced. As I say, we are still the third in the G7 in terms of aid spend, which I think actually, demonstrates our commitment to our continued development policy.
Absolutely, that's why people think that with the reduction that will nosedive. But aid generally, what is it for? What does it do? I mean, as far as I can remember, every time we're receiving aid all the time, and when nobody seems to have any idea, because one would like to think that the ultimate aim is to stop receiving aid to be self-reliant, if not exactly self-sufficient. Nobody's absolutely self-sufficient. But this aid thing, what is it doing? Are we not just being tied, being sucked in more into an international system where the aid
so I think that's a very good point, and I think this is one of the things that our integrated review was trying to address. And so much of the impact of aid can be lost if it's not aligned to the political objectives as well, and the two do need to be aligned. And that's why I think the first thing I mentioned about our priorities for Africa was building resilient economies. It's not about just keep throwing more and more money in. The idea is that we work with countries to actually, so that they can build their economies. And by building their economies, they can actually raise taxes. They can raise their own domestic revenue so that they can make the decisions on where they want to spend those taxes in terms of development, whether it's on roads or hospitals or schools. Those should be decisions for those countries, not actually for the donors. And so we need to actually build those economies. But at the same time, it's important that we help countries build those governance structures that then actually can take that revenue in and spend it where it's best spent. And so it's a whole system, if you like. It's a whole ecology, and that, I think, is where we need to be a lot more sophisticated about how we spend our development money, and work a lot closer with governments and align our spend with the government's objectives, and work with them in their development strategies. And I think that's often where, quite often development money, aid money gets lost, because unless you're working with the governments, other than humanitarian aid, it's not going to work. You need that buy-in. You need to be part of what the government wants to achieve, which hopefully is what the people want to achieve, and that's what they voted them in for.
That's it. So a lot of people have sort of come to the conclusion that it has actually failed.
I think there is an argument for that in many places.
So alternative, let's start thinking out of the box.
No, absolutely. I think there is I think there is an argument for that. I wouldn't say it's necessarily all failed, but I think many people can find all kinds of examples where it says failed. And I think that, again, is why we need to get far more sophisticated about it. And I think that's partly why we've had these mergers that we've seen in the UK government. It's so that we can actually look at it in the round. And I think that is a better approach, a more sophisticated approach to take. But I think it's also important that we work with governments and what they want, which hopefully, as I say, is what their people want as well.
Absolutely. And moving slightly away from it, even when it comes to trade, I've heard this one analyst say something. The relationship, as it were, between Africa or the Commonwealth and Britain, it's been declining for a while, maybe mid-70s when Britain joined the Europe. And then afterwards, what Africa needed, for instance, the Commonwealth for, was to fight colonialism. It was part of the decolonization process. After '94, once South Africa had their independence, it seems to many people Britain lost interest in Africa and the Commonwealth a long time ago. Even in the integrated review, it is emphasized that now it seems trade is moving from the Atlantic to the Pacific. That would be the focus. And even trade, when you look at the trade, for instance, you do with Gambia, 0.01%. So when we look at the trade with Africa, it's not that much, really.
No, but we want to change that. I think that you pointed out that I think a lot of people felt when we joined the European Union that our commitment to the Commonwealth had lessened. But I think that commitment has been renewed, and so our Prime Minister was determined, and it's happening now, that we have an embassy or a high commission in every Commonwealth country, and that has been done now. So we've been reopening embassies in places like Tonga, for example. So there is a recommitment to the Commonwealth and a belief in the Commonwealth, and to continue to, when we were talking about the development agenda, I think recognition that one of the things where we can be more effective as a development partner and as a partner generally is that we have very many shared systems, particularly, for example, like judicial systems and legal systems. So it makes us a natural, people within the Commonwealth, natural partners from that point of view. Quite often having a shared official language And so I think we need to take advantage of that and actually use those relationships and those traditional relationships to actually further each other's agendas.
So, exactly. So you mentioned these commonalities, but again, the net effect of the advantages of being part of the Commonwealth has not been very great, really, has it?
Well, I think, I mean, in terms of our renewed strategy, it's still very early days. So we will need to see the effect of that. But I think that we do. I mean, you mentioned the Gambia trading relationship, but I think if you look across the Commonwealth, we do have very strong trading relationships with many Commonwealth countries.
The big ones.
Well,
South Africa,
it's always
Nigeria, Kenya.
The size is always going to be bigger if the country is bigger. But I mean, one of my objectives here, and I'm hoping, as we come out of the pandemic, is to actually reignite the trading relationship between the UK and the Gambia. And I would like to see a lot more investment from the UK come to the Gambia, and that's certainly something that I've been talking to your ministers about. I've been recently talking to your trade minister about it. I think the two things we will need to wait for is probably for travel to ease up a bit, and I think we're starting to move in that direction, and also probably to get the other side of the elections in the Gambia, because people are a lot more willing to invest once they know that there's a government there that's going to be there for a few years. But that is something that we are working towards and that I would very much like to see.
Absolutely. So now, you've mentioned it, now we come to Gambia. One wonders, how would the cuts affect your programs here?
Well, so far, not too badly. Now, most of the UK development spend on the Gambia is through the multilaterals. So it's through the World Bank, the IMF, WHO, the UN. And of course, some of those budgets will have been cut. I'm not going to pretend they weren't. But many of those has been maintained. I mean, one of the reasons, unfortunately, some of the sort of year-on-year budgets to some of the other NGOs have taken more of a hit is that we're legally committed to some of our big multilateral funding. So I think our multilateral funding this year into multilateral institutions is something like £4 billion. And we're legally committed to continue that. So a lot of the UK aid spend in the Gambia was actually as part of those, and to some extent that is going to be protected because we have legal commitments to actually continue to provide funding to those bodies. In terms of
UNICEF said, for instance, that 60% has been cut.
Sorry?
From UNICEF, for instance.
Yes, I know. Yes, it has. It has. That's what I'm saying. They will have taken cuts, and it will have an impact on the Gambia. I mean, I can't say otherwise, but a lot of that will have been protected as well. I mean, UNICEF has been cut but it's worldwide. I don't know what that effect is going to have on individual programs in the Gambia. I mean, that will be something for UNICEF to answer. And that is, I have had this conversation with the head of the UNICEF here. I mean, we know this is painful, and we really do hope that the fiscal situation will allow us to get back to where we were quite quickly. But I can't deny that there will be an impact. But in terms of the projects that we will run as a High Commission, I'm pleased to say that actually we've managed to maintain most of our budget for projects that we'll be running individually as a High Commission here. So that's good news. I only learnt that this morning. But we do recognise that that it's been painful, and we hope we can get back to where we were quite shortly.
So what projects are currently ongoing?
So we've just finished a range of projects. I mean, the projects here, which we do, relate very closely to what we see as our objectives in the Gambia. And I think first and foremost is around governance and helping the Gambia consolidate the democratic gains made in recent years. So, and also relating to our relationship as part of the Commonwealth. So, one of the niche areas where we can offer assistance is, for example, building the capacity of the judiciary. So we have been supporting the Commonwealth Magistrates and Judges Association to actually work with the judiciary building their capacity. And that work will continue. Similarly, we've been working with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy on capacity building within the National Assembly. Again, it's something we're suited to do because we have shared parliamentary and shared judicial systems, so we continue to do that. Another area where we've actually quite significantly renewed our relationship is between the British military and the Gambian Armed Forces. And we are doing a lot of work with the Gambian Armed Forces, and will be doing a lot more work with the Gambian Armed Forces in terms of training and capacity building, particularly building the capacity for the Gambian Armed Forces to do more regional and international peacekeeping. The Gambian Armed Forces have a very fine record in peacekeeping. I've witnessed it myself. They protect. When I was in Sudan, I used to visit Darfur. It was Gambian troops that provided the escort, so they're very good on that. And other areas we will continue to work. We've been working over the last years on climate change. I mean, over the last year that we've had workshops bringing together CSOs and the government and talk about how they access international climate funding, to which the UK is one of the biggest donors and will continue to be one of the biggest donors, and how they access that. I mean, for example, I know the Gambia has had successfully bid into the Green Climate Fund. They've had, I think, about $25 million from that. I know they're bidding for more money, and we can work with them to build their capacity to bid for those funds. So quite a broad range. We've also worked with the Gambian Press Union on things like press freedom and how they can make best use of the Access to Information Act. We've worked with NGOs on sexual and gender-based violence and lessons to be learned, and how there can be more of an integrated approach to that, using lessons that we've learned from elsewhere. So it's a very broad portfolio. I'm sure I've missed a lot of things out.
Obviously. But how does it work? Is it that you identify certain key priority areas and then decide to help, or is it that the government or an NGO, anybody approaches you for help and you do? How does it work?
It's a mutual thing. So I mean, if I think about what what's in our country plan for the Gambia for this year, key focus is the open society's good governance, and particularly with a view to the fact that the elections are coming up. So it's on that good governance, open society's agenda. We also have a focus on safety and security, and that's much of the work that we're doing with the Gambian Armed Forces. We're also looking at things around counterterrorism, and then it is on climate change, particularly this year, and get the Gambia being a coastal and riverine country. This is a big for the people of the Gambia, and so we are doing working with the government and CSOs to work out how we can best help them, and also how they can make the best use of the climate change conferences at the end of the year.
That's it. So what has been the responses of government? Do you think that, of course, one understands your constraints, there are certain things you cannot say, but with all of your efforts, what do you think? How would you characterize the responses of government? Are you seeing positive outcomes in with your inputs?
So I think very positive, actually. If we talk to the government at all levels, including at ministerial levels, on a very regular basis. We talk about what we're doing, how we can best help. And whether it's the Ministry of Defence or the Minister of the Environment, or any of the other ministers involved in our Minister of Justice, any of the other ministers involved in our programs, we talk on a regular basis. And I think the great thing about our relationship with Gambia is that we can have these very open and honest discussions and work out, how we can best help each other. And that seems to work very well. And we have made great strides forward. I mean, as I say, if I just take our relationship with the Ministry of Defence and the Gambian Armed Forces, since the change of regime, how much progress we've made and how that relationship has regrown. It's been a fantastic response from the government and from our government, and as evidenced by the fact that our Minister for Armed Forces was here just last month, having very warm discussions with the Minister of Defence. It turned out they'd both been in the same unit training at Sandhurst in the UK, and this is it's just a small example of how close this relationship is.
Absolutely, but there are some people who have a more skeptical view. When you take most of these embassies or the international agencies, they will even do business with dictators. It doesn't matter who is in power, as long as they take care of their own interests, which is what they're here for. So we are quite skeptical about some of your designs. So the belief is that as long as we are following you people, as they put it, we are never going to get anywhere. There's never going to be any development. Development must be a radical idea, but here you're going to have these international institutions and bodies keeping the status quo.
I mean, I'm certainly not one that believes in the status quo. And this is why I think that there should always be this discussion about, is our aid being effective? Or is our aid, for example, allowing for bad governance to survive? And I think, that is a discussion that has to take place, and I think should take place. And again, I think it's another reason why the merger of the Foreign Office and the international development is not necessarily, it can be a good thing, because those two perspectives need to actually be joined up. I mean, the nature of diplomacy means that sometimes you have to deal with people that you don't particularly like. But the alternative is possibly going to war. I mean, they say war happens when diplomacy fails. So you do have to talk to these people. You do have to negotiate with these people. But at the same time, I think it's recognising when you do need to actually take a firm line as well. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves that when things aren't working, then we need to be honest about it. And this is one of the reasons why, and I've seen it develop myself over my many decades in this job, that I think we've moved away from actually that kind of rather paternalistic way of doing aid to what is far more about a partnership. And it should be about a partnership. And what we should be doing is actually, talking about a time when, I should be here, attracting Gambian tourists to the UK to spend money in the UK. That is the sort of partnership we should be working towards. And so I think there is a more sophisticated approach to this now. And it needs to be more about a partnership and what we can do to actually mutually help each other, because that's what it should ultimately be about.
Absolutely, the idea of partnership, and this is really the key, the issue here. I once heard the professor of African politics, SOAS, Julia Gallagher, saying that, look, the historical relationship has never been equal. It was always about the old ex-colonial master dealing with a junior partner. Africa was the junior partner. So we were looked in terms of less politically, but more in a humanitarian, in a moral sense. So our political needs are not really being taken care of in many ways, in areas where we should be helped. We all know that we need to industrialize. But that area, in certain key areas, strategic areas, that's just not been coming. So this, the patronizing attitude, it's still there, isn't it?
I think, I think there probably are still vestiges of it around. I mean, and these things take times to change. But I think certainly in my government, that's not where we are now. It is, it is far more about a mutual conversation about what would help you and what would help us, and that's what it should be. As I say, there will still be people around who have some of these views, but I'm certainly not one of them. I talk on a regular basis to my opposite numbers across Africa, and I don't think any of them hold those views anymore. And I'm probably one of the more the older ones of it, and I don't hold those views. And if you look at the profile increasingly of the Foreign Office and of our ambassadors, these aren't people who hold those views. And I think that those times have changed. I think one of the things you should look at is actually I think 50% of our ambassadors and high commissioners across Africa are now women, and most of them much younger than me. And have far more up-to-date views than that.
That's it. But again, there are some people who say that, particularly with the recent the toxicity of the Brexit debate. So most stuff that you thought you had forgotten about, they were in the past. They're coming back in many ways. And some of us who were following the arguments there, you could hear some really toxic stuff. Britain was divided, really.
I think it was a difficult period, but I think everybody, and I think one of the effects of the pandemic has made everybody realise that actually we're all in this together, not just as a country but as a world. Yes, it was a difficult period, but that's past us now. And I feel that so much has happened over the last year; it's long past us. And the thing now is to move forward, and to move forward with energy, and look at this as we're in a different place. Yes, there's still challenges there, but we've got to move forward, and that particularly means moving forward in our relationship with Africa, which has changed somewhat. And I mean, just as an example, if you look at, for example, the migration agenda, now. A Gambian wanting to go to the UK, want to go to work in the UK, will be treated exactly the same as anybody within the European Union.
But the so-called front door is so difficult. Some say that it sort of, in a sense, contributes to the back way because the front way is so difficult.
I'm glad you raised that, because I mean, in January this year, we introduced a new points-based immigration system. So it means that an employer who needs a skilled worker it can actually recruit globally for those skills. And whereas before, we had to give preference to the European Union, now we've got the whole world, which includes the Gambia.
That's it. And then maybe this is what we do not want because of the brain drain. Our nurses are leaving,
okay.
Our doctors are leaving.
So very glad
everybody's leaving.
So very glad you raised that one as well. And I think that's a legitimate concern. But it does actually level the playing field for the world, which I think is fair. But also, I mean, you mentioned the back way, and that is something that does concern me. And I mentioned it earlier. It's such a perilous journey for those people. It's so dangerous, and it leaves them open to exploitation, including, modern-day slavery. So that is something that we do need to address. And we've been working with IOM and the government on a project that is actually looking what we can do here in terms of development to actually discourage people from going, from taking those very dangerous routes, and set up businesses and be entrepreneurs here. and actually leave that talent here.
Absolutely. We've really come to the end of the program in many ways. Maybe I should have started with this question. How would you describe the job of a High Commissioner in a few words?
Well, in a few words. Okay. So actually, you mentioned it earlier. Obviously, my job as a High Commissioner is to represent the interests of the UK. But luckily in the Gambia, that's very easy because our interests and your interests are very similar, almost the same. And it's because we've been friends for a very long time.
Said like a consummate diplomat.
Thank you very much. I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you very
Pleasure
much.
talking to you.
With pleasure, it's all mine. Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us on The Viewpoint. Until next time, I'm Mohammed Mbouch. Goodbye.